In his heart. I am a city, not merely a city of stone and mortar, but the spirit of a bride born in and through the heart of the Eternal. Before the mountains were set in place, and before the seas were given their boundaries, I was chosen. Not yet formed, yet already beloved. I was in the mind of the Creator when Abraham, weary from his journey, met the priest-king Melchizedek upon my hills. The bread and wine they shared were like the whisper of a covenant yet to be sealed. My soil felt the footsteps of the man God called Friend, and in his shadow walked the promise of nations yet unborn. Upon my Mount Moriah, I watched as Abraham lifted the knife over his son Isaac, his only son, the child of promise. The air was heavy that day. My stones quaked with fear. But the angel called out, and the lamb was given. That moment etched my destiny. I was to be the place of sacrifice, the place where God would provide. Centuries passed, and I was still a whisper in the wind, a hill without walls, a place without a name among the nations. But in the heart of David, I had already taken shape. He longed for me as a man longs for a home he has never yet seen. And when he conquered the Jebusite stronghold and made me his city, the city of David, he did not see only my towers and gates. He saw the dwelling place of the Holy One. I remember the day the ark came to rest in my bosom, my Mount Zion. David danced before the ark with all his might, garments flying, laughter mingling with the music of lyres and trumpets. My streets rang with joy, for the presence of Eternal had come near. The King of Heaven had chosen me to be his footstool on earth. In those early days I was radiant. My hills sang, my gates stood proud, my valleys echoed with worship. I was as a bride adorned for her husband, clothed in the gold of promise. The nations did not yet know my name, but heaven had written it in glory. And so I waited, knowing my story had only begun. I am Jerusalem. I was conceived in love, birthed in covenant, and destined for the glory of the Most High. Glory among the nations. The day Solomon, son of David, took the throne, I felt the weight of a new dawn. Wisdom flowed from his lips like a river from the throne of God, and peace spread over my hills like the morning mist. He built for me a house, not of wood and clay, but of cedar and gold, precious stones and holy beauty. The temple rose upon my mount like a crown upon a queen's brow. No earthly palace compared to it, for it was not built for a king of flesh, but for the King of all kings. Oh, the day of dedication! Priests in spotless garments stood in their courses. Levites sang with cymbals and harps. The people gathered from every tribe. The Ark of the Covenant was brought in, the tablets of stone resting within, the covenant sealed by the presence of the Holy One. And then the glory. The cloud of the glory of the Lord filled the house thick and weighty, until even the priests could not stand to minister. Heaven and earth met within my walls that day, and I knew I was the dwelling place of God among men. My streets overflowed with joy in those years. Kings and queens came from distant lands to see my splendor. I remember the Queen of Sheba, her eyes wide as she beheld my courts, the steps of Solomon's throne, the burnt offerings ascending in holy fragrance. She spoke of my wisdom, my beauty, my God. I was the city set on a hill, my light drawing the nations. My people were blessed in their fields and in their homes, their children laughing in my marketplaces. The law of the Lord was honored, the covenant kept. I was a song in the heart of God's people. But even in the golden glow of Solomon's reign, shadows began to lengthen. His heart, once wholly given to the Lord, began to wander after other loves. Foreign altars rose on my hills. The smoke of strange gods curled into my sky. The covenant, so pure in David's day, began to crack under the weight of divided worship. I, Jerusalem, felt the tremor of it deep in my heart. Glory cannot remain where hearts grow cold. The cloud that once filled the temple still lingered, but I knew, if my people turned away, so would his presence. And so the golden age became a gilded cage. My beauty remained, my walls still stood, but the first fissure in my soul had appeared. I was still a queen, but a queen waiting in the shadows. Voice of my sons. The Lord is merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. When my people began to drift from his ways, he did not cast them aside without warning. Instead, he sent voices, men with fire in their bones and tears in their eyes. They walked my streets, stood in my gates, and cried aloud the words of the Holy One. My son Isaiah was one of the first who burned his words into my memory. He called me Ariel, the altar hearth of God, and spoke of a coming king whose reign would never end. His voice was like thunder and honey all at once. He told me to repent, to cease from my idols, to trust not in Egypt or Assyria, but in the Lord my Maker. He painted visions of my future, a day when nations would stream to my light, when swords would be beaten into plowshares, when my walls would be called salvation. But his warnings too pierced me. If you do not listen, your cities will burn, your land will be desolate, and you will be left like a hut in a cucumber field. Some listened for a moment. Most turned away. My marketplaces hummed with trade, my courts with politics, and the words of Isaiah were drowned out by the clink of coins and the whisper of foreign gods. Then came my son Jeremiah, my weeping prophet. If Isaiah was the voice of royal vision, Jeremiah was the cry of a broken heart. He walked my streets with tears streaming down his face, holding the word of the Lord like a burning coal he could not drop. He called me to return, to remember the covenant of my youth when I was betrothed to the Lord in the wilderness. I remember his voice at the temple gate. Do not trust in these deceptive words, saying, "The temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." He warned me that holiness was not in the stones of my sanctuary, but in the hearts of my people. He saw the storm coming, the armies from the north, and he begged me to turn before it was too late, but the laughter of mockers followed him. My priests said, "Peace, peace," when there was no peace. My kings feared Babylon more than they feared the Lord. And so Jeremiah wept, and I began to weep with him, for I could feel the ground shaking beneath my foundations. And then my son Ezekiel, he was far from me by the rivers of Babylon, yet his visions reached my heart like a trumpet blast. He saw me as a young bride whom God had clothed in splendor, but who had turned to unfaithfulness. His words were sharp as flint, yet strangely full of hope. He saw the glory of the Lord, the same cloud that had filled my temple, rising up and departing from my courts, lingering at the threshold and then leaving me. I cannot tell you the pain of that moment, the presence that had made me alive, gone. It was as if the sun had been torn from my sky. But Ezekiel also spoke of a day when the Lord himself would be my shepherd, when he would sprinkle clean water upon me, give me a new heart, and put his spirit within me. He spoke of a river flowing from my temple, bringing life wherever it went. Even in exile, his visions held a promise that my story was not over. Yet in those days, promise felt far away. I was a queen warned by her faithful servants, yet my ears were closed. My sons the prophets stood in my gates, proclaiming the truth. But my people preferred the songs of flatterers and the comfort of idols. And so I waited, heart heavy, spirit trembling, for the day when the warnings would see the light of the day. The day Babylon came. I remember the day they came for me. It was not a sudden strike, but a shadow that had been creeping closer with each passing year. The prophets had warned me, their voices like fire on my walls, yet I silenced them with the noise of my feasts, my commerce, my own hollow laughter. I thought myself untouchable, for the name of the Holy One was upon me. Surely the city of God could never fall. But the morning came when the horizon turned red, not with sunrise, but with the dust of an approaching army. Babylon. Their banners were black with pride, their armor glinting like a river of steel. They did not rush in. They surrounded me, like a predator circling wounded prey. The first days were filled with defiance. My gates still stood strong. My soldiers still sang songs of David. My people still clung to the hope that Egypt would come to our aid. But Egypt did not come. No one came. The nations I once called allies had already bowed to Babylon's throne. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The siege tightened like a noose. The markets fell silent. No grain, no oil, no wine. Mothers clutched empty bowls. Children's laughter, once my sweetest music, faded into dry sobs. The priests kept offering prayers in the temple, but even their voices grew faint as the smell of hunger filled my streets. I saw my people's dignity stripped away. The strong grew gaunt, their faces hollow. The elders who once sat in judgment now sat in dust, too weak to rise. Desperation turned neighbor against neighbor. My once vibrant courts became a place of barter for crumbs. Then came the night. The walls that had stood for centuries trembled under the weight of Babylon's siege engines. The gates, my proud bronze gates, groaned and splintered. They poured in like a flood. The soldiers of Babylon were relentless. They tore through my streets, their swords cutting down the last defenders. The air was thick with smoke and screams. The temple, oh, my beloved temple, they defiled it, stripping the gold from the altar, carrying off the sacred vessels. The place where the glory of God had once filled every corner was consumed in fire. I wanted to cry out, to call the name that had sheltered me for generations. But I remembered. I had already turned him away. The one who walked my streets in mercy had been rejected by my kings, ignored by my people, silenced by my pride. Now he had given me into the hands of my enemies, just as he said he would, through his prophets. By morning, my beauty was ashes. The streets were littered with the broken, the burned, the bound, the survivors, the young, the skilled, the noble, were chained and marched away toward the plains of Shinar. Their eyes looked back to me until the last hill hid me from their sight. I was left empty, stripped, silent. My walls cracked, my gates gone, my heart hollow. Yet in the stillness after the ruin, I heard the faintest whisper, not from Babylon, but from the God who had allowed this. Though I have torn you, I will heal you. Though I have struck you down, I will bind you up. I, Jerusalem, lay in the dust. But even in exile, my heart remembered his covenant. I would wait until the day the Holy One would gather my children from the rivers of Babylon and bring them home. A lament most bitter. I am a mother without her children. I wake to the sound of silence. No footsteps echoing in my streets, no merchants calling from the market, no voices rising in song from the temple courts. My arms ache, though I have none, for the little ones torn from me. My heart is hollow, yet it groans without ceasing. The wind blows through my ruins like a mourner's sigh. It carries with it the smell of burnt cedar and crushed incense, the remnants of the house where the Lord once dwelt among us. Each stone remembers the touch of his presence. Each stone mourns. I see their faces in the dust. The old men who once sat in the gate, now bowed low in shame. The maidens who danced in festivals, now led away in chains. The priests whose lips once spoke blessings, now silent in foreign lands. My children have no resting place. By the rivers of Babylon they sit, harps hanging on the willows, too heavy to lift. They speak my name, but it breaks them. Their captors mock them. Sing us, Sissa, one of the songs of Zion. How can they sing my songs in a strange land? Every night I walk the memory of my streets. I trace the path from the sheep gate to the Temple Mount, but where there was gold, there is ash, and where there was singing, there is only the cry of jackals. I remember the smell of fresh bread from the ovens, the laughter of children racing to the pool, the sound of Levites tuning their instruments for the morning sacrifice. All gone. I remember the prophets who came to me, Isaiah's steady voice calling me to trust in the Holy One of Israel, Jeremiah's tears falling into the dust as he warned me, Ezekiel's visions telling me the glory would depart. I hardened myself against them as a mother sometimes scolds her children for their own good. But I see now my scolding became rebellion. And the day came when the Lord turned his face from me, and the hedge around me was broken. The enemy's hands were cruel. They stripped my walls bare, toppled my towers, and left me exposed to the sky. They led my sons with hooks in their noses, my daughters with ropes around their necks. I wanted to gather them, to cover them, to cry out for them, but my voice was buried in the rubble. Now the seasons pass without me. Spring comes, but no almond blossoms are carried through my gates. Summer comes, but no harvest dances are held in my courts. Autumn arrives, but no psalms of thanksgiving rise from my people. Winter chills me, and I am left to shiver in the memory of what I was. I am Jerusalem, once called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. Now I am a widow in the dust, my children far from me, my crown cast down. I have no more tears to weep. My eyes are spent. My soul is poured out within me. My walls are broken, and so am I, and yet I cannot stop calling their names. Even if the wind is my only listener, I speak as though they might hear. Come home, return to me. Do not forget the place where the Lord met you. But my words drift away, swallowed by the distance, and I am left to hold my grief like a shroud. I do not know when they will return. I do not know if I will see them again. But I will not forget them. I am their mother, and I am still Jerusalem. The Whisper of Hope. For many years I spoke only in sighs and tears. My words were dust. My voice was the creak of broken gates. I had no song, only the echo of what once was. But one day, a wind different from the others swept across my ruins. It did not sting with sand, nor carry the smoke of burning cities. It was gentle, almost shy. It stirred the weeds growing between my stones and whispered through the cracks in my walls. It said, "I have not forgotten you." At first, I could not believe it. I had been forgotten for so long, left to count the passing of seasons with no comfort. My children had been born in a strange land. Some had never even seen my gates. But the whisper came again, this time stronger, this time like the voice of an old friend. And then I began to hear the prophets again. Not the warnings of judgment, but the promises of return. Isaiah's words rose like sunlight over my horizon. Comfort, comfort my people. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned. Ezekiel's voice came too, like the sound of rushing water. I will take you from among the nations and bring you back into your own land. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. Even in Babylon, Daniel's prayers reached me. Prayers for my restoration, prayers that the God of heaven would look upon my desolation and act. His tears watered the soil of my hope. And far away, by the rivers of exile, I began to hear my children singing again, softly at first, as though afraid. They sang of me, they sang of Zion. They sang the psalms that had once risen from my streets. And I realized they had not forgotten. The hand of the Lord was moving again. Kings who did not know him began to speak of my rebuilding. Cyrus's decree reached me like the sound of a trumpet. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem. Whoever is among you of his people, may the Lord be with him, and let him go up. I could almost hear footsteps coming closer. I could almost feel the weight of stone upon stone, walls rising again where there had been only rubble. I could almost see the dust of travel as my children began their long road home. I am still scarred. I am still marked by the siege and the fire, but a small, trembling truth has taken root in my heart. The Lord is not finished with me. I, Jerusalem, once widowed and barren, will yet be called, sought out, a city not forsaken. I, who lay in ashes, will again wear garments of praise. My streets will again ring with the laughter of boys and girls playing. The courts of my God will again hear the songs of the redeemed. And so I wait, not with empty despair, but with the watchfulness of dawn. The night was long, but I hear the birds beginning to sing. The light is coming, my children are coming. I am Jerusalem, and I am beginning to hope again. Amidst hope, a whisper from my sister. The night was still, yet I felt it. A stirring in the wind, a tremor beneath my stones. Not the dread of armies, nor the mourning of exile. No, this was different. It was joy, expectant, quiet, and holy. From the south, over the ridges and fields, I heard her voice. Bethlehem. Little Bethlehem, the smallest among the clans of Judah. Yet that night her tone was rich with wonder. She called to me in the dark. Jerusalem, sister, wake. He is here. I leaned into the silence, straining to catch every word. The child has come, the one we have waited for, the one the prophets promised. My streets are lit by starlight tonight, and shepherds have knelt in awe. Angels, Jerusalem angels, have sung above my fields. My heart skipped like a drum in a festival procession. Bethlehem, is it true? The king, here, now. Yes, she breathed, but not as you thought. No palace, no trumpet blast, no gates flung wide, only a stable, the smell of hay, and a mother's gentle hands. He sleeps now, wrapped not in royal garments, but in swaddling cloths. I closed my eyes and remembered the words of the prophet Micah. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel. Bethlehem, I whispered, guard him well. I have waited for him as long as you have. Tell him that I long to see his face, to hear his steps in my streets. Her reply came like the rustle of wheat in the night. You will, Jerusalem, but be ready, for his coming will not be as you expect. He will walk your courts and teach in your temple. Your children will shout, Hosanna, but, O Jerusalem, there is a shadow too. The word stung, though I did not yet understand. What shadow? I asked. Bethlehem hesitated, as though her voice was wrapped in sorrow. A sword will pierce his mother's heart, and you, my sister, you will see him lifted high, but not crowned with gold. A shiver passed through my stones. I wanted to ask more, but Bethlehem's voice faded into the night, replaced by the soft cries of a newborn carried on the wind. That night, I prayed as I had never prayed before. I prayed for the child who was my king, for the journey he would take to my gates, for the day our voices would meet. I prayed that when he came, I would recognize him and not turn away. And in the stillness, I vowed to hold her secret, to guard it like a treasure. For Bethlehem had told me the beginning of the story, and I knew that somehow I would bear its end. I am Jerusalem, and the King is here. The King walks my streets. He came, just as Bethlehem promised, he came. Not in the form of a conquering warrior with banners high, nor with the thunder of chariots, but as a man whose steps were as quiet as the sunrise, yet whose presence carried the weight of eternity. I knew him the moment his feet touched my stones. It wasn't his clothing, plain and dusty from the road, nor the small band of followers who trailed behind him with wide eyes and eager hearts. It was the way the air around him felt, as if heaven itself had bent low to walk within my walls. He looked upon me with a gaze I could not hold for long. There was no fear in his eyes, only a piercing compassion, the kind that sees every wound, every scar, every sin I have ever known. And yet, he did not turn away. The children knew first. They ran to him, their laughter echoing between my streets. They shouted, Hosanna! Hosanna to the Son of David! Their joy bounced off my walls and soared into my courts like the music of the Psalms once sung by my kings. He entered my temple. Oh, my heart trembled at the sight. Not since Solomon's day had such glory filled those courts. He spoke, and the words were not like the debates of scribes or the rulings of priests. They cut deeper, cleaner, like a sword of light, exposing lies, uprooting pride, planting truth. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he read from the scroll of Isaiah, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I felt something shift in my very stones. This was not only a teacher. This was the King Bethlehem had whispered of, the one my prophets had wept for, the one for whom I had waited through centuries of exile and ruin. But even as I rejoiced, I felt it, the shadow Bethlehem had spoken of. I saw it in the furrowed brows of the Pharisees, in the whispers of the temple guards, in the clenched fists of those who feared their power would crumble under his truth. I wanted to wrap my walls around him, to shield him from their malice, to keep him here forever in peace. But the Lamb had not come to be hidden. He had come to be given. And though I did not yet see the hill, the cross, or the darkness to come, my stones felt the weight of it already. He left my temple that evening, walking toward the Mount of Olives as the sun bled crimson over my rooftops. I watched him go, the sound of children's hosannas still in the air, knowing somehow that the same voices would soon be drowned out by shouts of a different kind. I am Jerusalem, and the King has walked my streets. The tears of the King. The day was clear, but my heart was not. I had seen him approach before, always surrounded by the hopeful, the curious, the sick pressing in for healing. But this time, he stopped on the slope of the Mount of Olives and looked upon me as though the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. And then he wept. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a man hiding his grief, but the deep, unrestrained sobs of one whose heart has been torn in two. His voice trembled as he spoke my name, twice, like a mother calling a lost child. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." His words struck me like thunder. Every stone in me remembered the blood of the prophets. Zechariah, beaten in my own temple court. Jeremiah, mocked and chained. Isaiah, sawn apart for speaking truth. He named my sins not with condemnation in his tone, but with the agony of a love refused. "If only you had known on this day what would bring you peace," he said, his tears falling into the dust at his feet, "but now it is hidden from your eyes." I could not speak. How could I answer the one whose hands had healed my blind, whose voice had called my dead back to life? How could I explain the hardness of my gates, the coldness of my courts, the pride of my rulers? He spoke again, words I wish I had never heard. "The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another sudden, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." Every syllable felt like a sword through my heart. I had been warned before, by Isaiah, by Jeremiah, by Ezekiel, and many other prophets, and now by the very one I had been made for. The King, my King, was telling me that my rejection would be my ruin. Yet in his eyes, even through the tears, there was still love. It was not the love of a ruler for his city's loyalty, but the love of a father for his lost child, of a bridegroom for his faithless bride. He turned from me that day, walking down toward my gates, and I knew that the hosannas that once welcomed him would soon be replaced by cries for his death. I wanted to cry out, to open my arms, to plead with him not to go. But I remained silent, my walls echoing only with the fading sound of his footsteps. I am Jerusalem, and the King has wept over me. The day the sun hid its face. I had seen blood before, blood in my courts from sacrifices, lambs, goats, bulls, poured out in obedience to the law. Blood on my streets from battles, uprisings, and Roman whips. But this blood, this was different. The King I had been built for was walking through my streets, carrying a cross too heavy for his torn back. His skin was shredded by scourging, his face bruised and swollen from fists, his head crowned with thorns that mocked his royalty. Every step left a trail, not just of crimson on the stones, but of sorrow on my soul. The crowds were loud, yet I could hear his labored breathing above them all. Some spat, others jeered, and still a few wept, but most just watched, their eyes like stone. I wanted to scream, to shake my walls until every person remembered his touch, his words, his miracles. But I stood silent, unable to save him. At Golgotha, they nailed him down. The sound, iron against flesh, was a sound I will never forget. It was as though the hammer struck my own foundations, and I shuddered. They lifted him up, and there he hung, my king, between two criminals. He spoke, not curses, but forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How could he speak like that? Even as his life bled away, he poured out mercy. Hours passed, the sun dimmed. At midday, darkness fell, not like the coming of night, but like creation itself turning its face away. The air grew heavy. I felt the ground beneath me begin to tremble, as if the very earth could not bear to watch. He cried out again, not to me, but to his Father, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I had never heard such agony, not in all my centuries of wars, famines, or sieges. This was deeper. It was the sound of separation, the tearing apart of something holy and eternal. Then with a final breath, he declared, "It is finished," and he gave up his spirit. The ground convulsed, rocks split. In my heart, the great veil in the temple tore from top to bottom. The barrier between God and man ripped apart. I knew what it meant. Through his death, he had made a way for my people, for all people, to come to God. Yet my streets were still wet with his blood. I am Jerusalem. On that day the sun hid its face, the earth shook, and my heart was pierced through. The King had come, and I had let him die. The longest 3 days. The crowd had gone. The soldiers had marched away. The hill outside my walls lay quiet, its cruel work done. And I sat in a silence so thick it felt like it could crush the stones of my gates. I am used to sound, the murmur of merchants in my markets, the chanting of priests in my courts, the laughter of children chasing each other through narrow streets. But now every corner echoed with absence. He was gone. The teacher who walked my roads with dusty feet and words that made the blind see and the dead rise. The healer whose hands had touched lepers without shrinking back. The shepherd who gathered the wandering like lambs. Gone, sealed in a borrowed tomb. My temple stood, but the heart of my worship felt hollow. Yes, the sacrifices continued, the incense rose, the priests recited the prayers. But in my soul, I knew the Lamb had already been offered, and I had watched him die. The first night was heavy, like a storm that never broke. The second day dragged, a grey shadow pressing over every roof. Some whispered that perhaps he would return, remembering words he had spoken. Others scoffed. Dead is dead. Rome has the final word. I could not answer them. I only knew I felt unfinished. I thought of my prophets. Isaiah, who spoke of a servant pierced for our transgressions. David, who sang of a Holy One who would not see decay. Jonah, who was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and came out alive. Was this the same story unfolding again before my eyes? I wanted to believe, but the weight of loss pressed hard against my gates. On the 3rd day, just before dawn, something stirred. The air felt different, lighter, charged, as though the stones themselves were holding their breath. Some of my guards stationed at the tomb returned pale and trembling. They would not meet my eyes. They spoke of a quake, of a blinding light, of a stone rolled away without human hands. And then whispers began. He is not there. The tomb is empty. He is alive. I did not yet see him, but I knew. The silence had broken. The sun was rising again. I am Jerusalem. For 3 days I lived without my son, but now light is coming back to me. The day I saw him again. The dawn was still fresh when the news spread like a river breaking its banks. Not rumor, not wishful thinking. The stone was rolled away, the tomb empty, and he was alive. At first I barely dared to hope. My streets had heard too many false promises. My gates had opened to too many pretenders. But then the testimonies multiplied. Women who had seen him, disciples who had touched him, a stranger on the Emmaus road, whose words had burned like fire until he broke the bread and vanished from sight. And then he came. Not with the thunder of armies or the pomp of kings, not to the palace of Herod or the fortress of Pilate, but to an upper room, to fearful friends hiding behind locked doors. Walls meant nothing to him now. He entered without knocking, his presence filling the space with a peace I could feel in my very stones. "Peace be with you," he said, and oh, how the air itself seemed to breathe again. I, Jerusalem, had once shouted, "Crucify him!" Yet here he was, not with wrath, but with wounds in his hands and side, offering forgiveness I did not deserve. Words spread faster than my walls could contain it. Thomas, who had doubted, placed trembling fingers in those scars. By the Sea of Galilee, he made breakfast for the ones who had fled in fear. On my hills, he spoke again of the kingdom, not a kingdom of iron spears and golden thrones, but of mercy, truth, and unshakable love. I watched him walk the same streets where he had once carried the cross, but now he carried only light. Everywhere he stepped, the shame I bore from the day of his death began to crack and fall away. And then, 40 days later, I stood at the Mount of Olives and saw him lifted from my sight, rising like the dawn itself. The angels said he would return, and my heart has held that promise ever since. I am Jerusalem. I have seen my King rejected, crucified, buried, and alive again. I am no longer only the city of David. I am the city of the eternal risen one. The coming of the Spirit. It was the Feast of Weeks. My courts and streets were filled with pilgrims from every land under heaven, men from Parthia and Media, women from Rome and Crete, families from the farthest edges of my world. They came with offerings, songs, and the smell of bread still warm from morning ovens. I have seen many festivals. I have felt the throb of Passover drums, the sway of harvest psalms, the solemn hush of the Day of Atonement. But that day, something came that no feast had ever known. It began not in the temple courts, but in an upper room, a sound, not from the streets, not from the mountains, but from heaven itself, like a mighty rushing wind, roaring down my alleys and curling around my towers. It swept into that room where his followers prayed, and then fire. Not the fire of torches or sacrificial altars, but flames that rested upon each of them, burning without consuming, blazing without harm. They began to speak. Oh, how they spoke! Words in the languages of every nation gathered in my heart that day. The Parthian understood, the Egyptian understood, the man from the Isles of Greece understood. Each heard in his own tongue the wonders of God. The crowd surged toward the sound, a tide of amazement and bewilderment. Some laughed, thinking it was drunkenness. But then Peter, yes, the same Peter who had denied him, stepped forward with a voice like a trumpet and proclaimed, "This is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, says God, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh." And as he preached of Jesus, crucified, risen, and exalted to the right hand of the Father, my stones trembled, for I knew the truth of every word. The one I had rejected was indeed Lord and Christ. That day 3,000 souls were added to the way, the truth, and the life. They filled my houses with teaching, prayer, and breaking of bread. They shared what they had, cared for the poor, and worshipped with gladness. I, Jerusalem, have seen kings crowned and kingdoms fall, but never had I seen a kingdom born in fire and wind, a kingdom not bound to my walls, yet born within them. On that day, I became not just the city of David, but the birthplace of the church, the dwelling place of the Spirit of the living God. The spreading flame. The wind that came at Pentecost did not remain still. It pushed outward, spilling from my narrow lanes into the villages beyond. The fire that danced upon heads would not be contained within my walls. Every day I saw them, those followers of the way, gathering in homes, breaking bread, speaking the name of Jesus with a joy that persecution could not quench. The sick were healed in the streets. The lame walked past my gates with newfound strength. And the poor, the forgotten, the widowed, they were lifted up, no longer invisible to my people. But with joy came opposition. My rulers, still stung by the name of the Nazarene, sought to silence them. Peter and John were dragged before councils, commanded to speak no more in his name. Yet they left rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer for him. And then, Stephen. Oh, Stephen, full of grace and power. His words burned hotter than any torch in my courts, for they cut through pride and pierced the heart. When false witnesses rose against him, they dragged him outside my gates. I felt the stones fall like heavy drops of rain, each one silencing his voice, yet sealing his testimony. And as he fell, his eyes looked upward, seeing what I could not. The Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. Fear scattered them like chaff on the wind. Some fled to Samaria, others to the coast, and still others beyond Judea. Yet wherever they went, the word went with them. My streets grew quieter, but the gospel's voice grew louder. From Antioch to Cyprus, from Damascus to the far islands, the message I had first heard on Pentecost now spread like a river breaking its banks. Even a man named Saul, who once hunted the way with fury, returned to me transformed, speaking boldly of the one he once despised. I, Jerusalem, was no longer the sole lampstand of this light. The flame I had seen birthed in my heart was now running to the ends of the earth, and I knew I could never call it back. The kingdom had begun. Not a kingdom of walls, thrones, or armies, but a kingdom that lived in the hearts of men and women, and that kingdom was unstoppable. Last Passover. The spring air was sweet, but there was a tension in it, a tautness like a bowstring drawn and waiting to release. It was Passover, my streets alive again, with pilgrims from every corner of the land. They came with lambs and unleavened bread, with songs on their lips, and the ancient story on their tongues. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. But I, Jerusalem, could feel the cracks in my own walls, not the stones, but the hearts. The courts of the temple swelled with worshippers, yet behind the priests' eyes there was fear. They spoke in hurried whispers about Rome's patience running thin, about zealots in the hills, sharpening their blades. The governor's fortress was full, soldiers standing in shadows, their armor gleaming like the scales of a watchful serpent. I watched families offer their lambs, the blood flowing down the temple's channels, a river of crimson recalling the mercy of God. But I also remembered another lamb, the one who had entered my gates not long ago, riding on a donkey, the crowd shouting, "Hosanna!" I remembered how he had wept over me, saying, "If you, even you, had known on this day what would bring you peace." Those words were still an arrow in my soul. This Passover was not like the others. There was a heaviness in the air, as though heaven itself was holding its breath. Rumors spread that certain prophets had spoken again, warning of fire and siege. But the people busied themselves with preparations, brushing aside the thought of danger like dust from their sandals. Night fell, and the city glowed with the warm light of oil lamps. Families reclined around their tables, recounting the night the Lord struck Egypt. They ate in haste, as their fathers once did. But now, unknowingly, they ate on the eve of their own captivity. I felt the Lord's presence near, though I could not tell if he came to deliver or to judge. Somewhere in the night, I heard a distant trumpet, not the shofar of worship, but the metallic call of soldiers on the march. I wanted to cry out to my people, "Flee to the mountains, do not linger in my streets." But the noise of the feast drowned my warning. The wine flowed, the songs rose, and no one saw the shadows lengthening outside my gates. This was my last Passover as I had known it, a night of remembering freedom, while my chains were already being forged. I looked up at the stars and prayed, "O Lord, remember mercy in the midst of wrath. Do not utterly forsake the city you chose for your name." And as the night deepened, I felt the earth tremble, a sign that the long-foretold hour was drawing near. The siege. They came at dawn, just as he had said it would be. The rumble of their march reached me before their shadows touched my walls. Legions upon legions, like a tide of iron and leather, poured across the hills. Their standards caught the morning light, the golden eagles gleaming, the red banners swaying in the wind. Rome had arrived, not as a guest, but as an executioner. I, Jerusalem, had heard his voice before, the voice of the one who had stood on the Mount of Olives, gazing at me with tears in his eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you, encircle you, and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Now those words had flesh. I saw the embankments rise, timber after timber lifted into place by hands that knew no mercy. I saw the catapults crouch like beasts ready to pounce. The roads that once welcomed pilgrims now carried only soldiers and siege stones. The valleys around me, once filled with songs of ascent, now smoked with the fires of my destroyers. Inside my walls, fear became my food. At first we rationed our bread, certain rescue would come. But days became weeks, and the storehouses whispered their emptiness. Mothers rocked hollow-cheeked children. The marketplace stood still, no merchants, no laughter, only footsteps dragging through dust. I remembered his lament. How he had cried, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Now I longed to gather my people, but my wings were broken. The first stones came with no warning, a roar, a crash, a plume of dust, like the breath of death itself. My walls shuddered, children screamed, flaming arrows arced through the night, and the city glowed with its own ruin. I had once been the city of David, the dwelling place of his name. Surely God would defend me. But the heavens stayed silent, not absent, but silent, as though the last plea had already been spoken, and now the verdict was being carried out. The Romans waited with the patience of judgment. Every passing day drained my breath, weakened my walls. And I knew the day would come, the day he had spoken of, when my gates would fall, my temple would be trampled, and not one stone would be left upon another. That day was not yet here, but I could hear it in the cracking mortar. I could taste it in the dust clinging to my tongue, and I could feel it in the stillness, the kind that comes when even the angels know the prophecy is being fulfilled before their eyes. The temple falls. It began at the heart, not my outer courts, not my gates. The blow came to the very center of my being, the place where heaven and earth once met. The Romans had breached my walls. The cry of the watchman was no longer a warning. It was a lament. Streets once worn smooth by the feet of worshippers now ran red with the blood of my children. Still, I hoped the temple would stand. Surely, if any stone would be spared, it would be that stone. Surely God would draw his sword for his house. I watched as they climbed the steps, soldiers hardened by campaigns across the earth, now stepping into the courts where psalms had once risen like incense. They carried no reverence, only torches and steel. Their laughter echoed in chambers where the Holy One's name had been whispered with trembling lips. The first torch was thrown against the cedar beams. Dry from years of sun, they caught at once, flames racing upward like serpents unleashed. The gold on the walls shimmered, then blackened, then began to drip. Molten streams flowing across the stones, as though the temple itself wept tears of fire. The sound, Oh, the sound was like the tearing of my own soul. Timbers groaned, stones cracked under the heat. Every note of music I had ever known, from David's harp to the Levites' choirs, seemed to dissolve into a single scream. The priests tried to fight the flames, but the Romans cut them down where they stood. The inner sanctuary, the holy place, was laid bare to eyes that had no right to see it. Then the Holy of Holies itself was consumed, the curtain torn not from top to bottom by divine hands, but shredded by the spears of men. Smoke rose over me like a funeral shroud. It curled into the heavens, carrying the last fragrance of the sacrifices that had once made me whole. The city and the temple were no longer two. We were one great ruin, one shared grave. And yet in the flames, I remembered his words. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. At the time, I had not understood. Now, watching the holy house collapse, I wondered, was he speaking of these stones or of himself? Was this the end, or the seed of something yet unseen? The fire burned until there was nothing left but ash and silence. And I, Jerusalem, the city of God, stood hollow, my glory gone, my heart emptied. But deep within that emptiness, a whisper remained, faint as a dying ember, I will rise again. The long silence and the new song. For a long time, I was nothing but memory. My stones lay scattered. Weeds grew where choirs once stood. The wind moved through my empty gates like an old mourner, rehearsing grief with every sigh. Empires rose and fell over me like waves over a sunken rock. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, each left their marks, but none restored my heart. I had been God's own dwelling place. And now I was only a story told in exile. My children spoke of me by the rivers of foreign lands. Their harps hung on willows. They swore oaths to remember me, yet their tears fell into waters that were not mine. Generations came and went. Pilgrims found my dust and pressed it to their lips, but the song of the Lord seemed far away. I waited, I listened. Not for armies, not for kings, but for his footsteps. The one who had walked my streets, wept over my walls, and promised he would not leave me forever. Centuries bled into one another until time itself felt like a long winter night. But then came the vision. I saw a city, but not as I had ever been. No scarred walls, no broken gates, no temple in ruins. This was me, but remade, renewed, reborn. I was coming down from God, out of heaven, clothed as a bride for her bridegroom. My garments were not the dust of mourning, but the gold of glory, the white of righteousness, the jewels of promise fulfilled. The voice thundered, not from my hills, but from the throne. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. And in that moment, I knew I would never be empty again. No more weeping at my gates, no more children carried away in chains, no more blood on my stones. Every tear, mine and my children's, he wiped away with his own hand. Death was gone. The long night was over. The river of the water of life flowed through my midst, clear as crystal, and on its banks grew the tree of life, its leaves for the healing of the nations. Nations. The same peoples who once trampled me now walked my streets with joy, their faces lit not by the sun, nor by the moon, but by the Lamb himself. He was my light. He was my temple. He was my glory. I, once the city of exile, ashes and lament, had become the city of God forever. No gate was shut, no heart was afraid. And the song, oh, the song that rose in my streets, not the mournful strains of longing, but the endless anthem of the redeemed. Come, I call now, not to armies or merchants, but to the thirsty, to the weary, to those who had wandered in darkness. Come, drink from the water of life without cost. I am no longer the Jerusalem of ruins. I am the new Jerusalem, and I will never, never be forsaken again. My bridegroom and me. I am the city that once wept through the night, but now I awaken to no more mourning. The morning here never fades, for the Lamb is my light, and his face is the sunrise that never sets. I have waited for him longer than words can tell. Through centuries of ruin, I whispered his promises to my broken stones. Through ages of exile, I held his covenant close, like a bride clutching her betrothal ring in the dark. And now, the wait is over. The king has come. The bridegroom has claimed his bride. No veil hides me from his gaze. No shadow dims the brilliance of his presence. His voice is the song that shaped my foundations. His touch is the fire that has purified my walls. I see him, not as the suffering servant who once walked my streets under the weight of a cross, but as the reigning Lord, crowned in the glory he had with the Father before the world began. And yet, even in this splendor, his eyes hold the same compassion, the same love that made him weep over me when I was lost. Around me, my children, the redeemed from every tribe, tongue, and nation, fill my courts with worship. The streets, paved with pure gold, echo with laughter that will never end. Every step is a dance of joy. Every breath is filled with the fragrance of his presence. The river of the water of life flows from his throne, winding through my heart, feeding the tree whose leaves heal the wounds of the nations. I think of the wars that once raged, the divisions that once tore people apart. And I see now the beauty of unity under the reign of the Lamb. There is no temple here, for I am not a city with sacred places hidden within walls. All of me is holy, all of me is his. The bridegroom and the bride dwell together without separation. God with his people, love with its beloved, forever. I look upon him and remember the covenant words. I will be their God, and they will be my people. It is no longer a promise. It is my present reality. The ages to come stretch before us like an endless sunrise, yet there is no sense of time slipping away. Here, eternity is not just unending life. It is unbroken fellowship, unclouded joy, unhindered love. I am the bride, clothed in the righteousness he gave me. I am the city of God, shining with his light. I am the dwelling place of the Almighty, and as his voice rings through my streets, he calls to the world still wandering. The Spirit and the bride say, "Come." This is my joy, this is my crown, to stand forever in his presence, and to welcome all who will come. I am the bride. I am the New Jerusalem, and my song will never cease.